But fighting continues across the full width of the front line. Well, Professor Michael Clark joins me now. Michael, which are the key places we need to be looking out for here?
Yeah, Ian, there's 5 places. The front line is 1,000 kilometres, 600 miles or so. And there's 4 places, so going from west to east, Kherson and Kozachi Lahiri. Down there, the Ukrainians have crossed the river, and they've got a lodgement, particularly at Kozachi Lahiri, and the other side of the Antonovsky Bridge on the M14 at Kherson. That's not a big lodgement, but if the Russians don't do more about it, it will get bigger. And that's what the Ukrainians are trying to do, is to stretch them. Then if you come around Robotyne, this is the big one, and we'll come back to that in a while. This is where the Ukrainians are making probably the biggest effort. 50 miles further east, Velika Novosilka. Again, they've made quite a big effort there, and they're moving southwards. So those two, Robotyne and Velika Novosilka, are the 2 main foci of their offensive. But then they're still moving in Bakhmut, to the south of Bakhmut. They've actually taken quite a lot of ground. They might try to pivot south from that, but that's been a quieter front. Although they're breaking through, it looks as if the Ukrainians are taking some stuff away from there to send it to where they're really concerned with. Those are 4 areas, but the 5th area is the Russians. The Russians are bringing a big force together towards Kupiansk. They're certainly not taking Kupiansk now, but they've moved forces north from Crimea, where they were digging in a lot. They've done quite well at Crimea to hang on over several months, and they're putting a big force together in Kupiansk. What they're obviously thinking is if they can either take something now, or when the Ukrainian offensive has run out of steam, which it must do at some point, then the Russians will attack over the winter and try and get back into the north, give the Ukrainians something else to worry about. So that's where we are at the moment across the whole front.
So take us back to Robotyne then. What's the strategic significance of this place?
Yeah, the significance is that it's a small place in itself, but it's on the high ground. There's like a ridge that runs north-south, and they can see Tokmak, which is the area they're aiming for. They're going for Tokmak because Tokmak is the regional hub, road and rail. And if they get to Tokmak, then the rest of the south will be a lot easier for them to try to conquer. And from Robotyne, and it's a tiny place, actually, but really important because the Russians are dug in there because it was the high ground. And the Ukrainians now, according to their own general staff, they're moving eastwards towards Verbove. They're trying to extend the line itself, but southwards to Novoprokopivka, where they're fighting now, and this far southeast to Ocherutuvate. These 2 places are important because they control the roads. And so the road from Novoprokopivka into Tokmak, it's the 0408. There's only a couple of good roads, and that's one of them, the 0408. And this one, the Ocherutuvate, that's the 0401. That's the other road into Tokmak. If the Ukrainians can get hold of these 2 roads or cover them with artillery, then Tokmak becomes much more vulnerable.
And Tokmak potentially unlocks further south.
It would, towards Melitopol, towards the coast. That's a big... I mean, the Russians, we've known for weeks that the Russians really built a lot of defences around Tokmak. That's the 3rd layer of defences. Their first layer of defence was north of Robotyne. Their second layer of defence is south of Robotyne. The 3rd layer of defence is at Tokmak. And the Ukrainians are through the first 2 layers, which were probably the toughest. We don't really know what the 3rd one will be like because the Russians are stretched, they've got shortages, their troops are pretty tired. The Ukrainians are hoping that when they get to the 3rd line, which they will in a few days, I suspect, it's only about 8 or 10 miles from where they are now, when they get to the 3rd line, they may find that they can get through it more quickly.
If they do make these breakthroughs, though, and they start heading towards Tokmak, are the Russians not likely to try and blow up the roads and destroy them?
Well, there's not that much they can do about the roads, but they can do something about the rivers. They are reputed to have dammed the river east of Tokmak to flood some of the ground, and they may well blow that dam. It's a makeshift dam, but they may well blow it, and there's another formal dam there, and flood the town of Tokmak. So that's entirely plausible. I mean, the Russians will certainly make it as hard as they possibly can for the Ukrainians, a scorched earth policy, or in this case, a flooded earth policy. They blew the dam at Novokokhovka a few weeks ago, and they'll certainly do this if they think they want to.
I mean, we might be getting a bit ahead of ourselves here, Michael, but I mean, do we know how heavily fortified Tokmak itself is?
Well, the static fortifications look fairly impressive from satellite photographs. So there's lots of mines, lots of anti-tank ditches, lots of dragon's teeth, as they call them. What we don't know is how well the Russians can cover them, because all of these static defences only work if you've got them covered with artillery and infantry and aircraft, or helicopters in this case. If they're not covered, then any opposing force just works their way through them. It slows them down. But if being slowed down, they can then be attacked while they're working their way through them, then they're killing grounds. And what we don't know is whether the Russians are so stretched that they won't be able to cover them, and the Ukrainians they've got better equipment, will they be able to get over them relatively quickly? That's the question that they won't know and the Russians won't know until that moment arrives.
All right, Michael, thanks for that.